Hello, everybody. We will go ahead and get started promptly since I know we don't have that much time together today. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules, especially around holiday season, to join us today to learn a little bit more about the fields of positive psychology, mindfulness, and self-compassion, what we refer to as the three pillars of resilience, and how these fields can be used to proactively support student mental health. My name is Simone Figueroa, and I am the president of You Thrive Educational Services. And for those of you who we have not had the pleasure of partnering with, I wanted to just take a moment and share a little bit about our organization. We provide proactive mental and emotional wellness curriculum to college students to help them manage stress, become more resilient, and ultimately not just survive, but truly thrive throughout their undergraduate experiences and beyond. Okay, so just a little overview, a roadmap of where we'll be going with our time together today. So we'll start off with about 10 minutes of learning a little bit about these fields of positive psychology, mindfulness, and self-compassion. We'll define them. I'll share a little bit about the research that's specifically been conducted on college students and the benefits that learning these fields has. And then we'll spend about 10 minutes actually going through some experiential exercises from these fields. The hope is that you'll be able to walk away with some tools that you could begin to use in your own life and perhaps infuse in the work that you do with students. And then lastly, we'll open it up for about 10 minutes of Q&A and discussion. So with that, moving into our first field, positive psychology. Positive psychology can be defined as the application of psychological research on human flourishing and optimal functioning to help humans lead an engaged, meaningful, and fulfilling life. So what does that mean? Well, whereas traditional psychology tends to focus on getting an individual who's languishing back to baseline, positive psychology is all about getting an individual from baseline into the thriving zone, because we know that the lack of a mental health disorder or issue does not equate to thriving in life. And specifically how this relates to college students, it has been shown that college students who report higher levels of optimism and well-being, which are two aspects of positive psychology, not only do they enjoy college more, but they also report higher levels of satisfaction with their overall college experience. And in one study of nearly 4,000 first-year students, so a pretty large study sample size, it was found that their level of the positive emotion of optimism and hope was a more accurate predictor of their first year grades than their SAT scores or their high school GPAs. And this is huge because these are skills that can be taught, as are the other fields, which we'll get into, but they're not just innate. And so if we can equip students with tools and skills from these fields, it can really help to be protective against challenges that they're going to be facing. Now moving on to mindfulness. So mindfulness can be defined as purposeful, non-judgmental attentiveness to the present moment in oneself and the external world. So much of our time, our depression and our stress tends to come from ruminating over things that have happened in the past that we can't change. And oftentimes, a lot of our anxiety and worry stem from focusing on things that may or may not ever happen in the future. So mindfulness is a practice that really helps us get back to the present moment so we could see things clearly, so we can begin to respond rather than react during times of struggle. And as it relates to college students with higher levels of mindfulness experience lower levels of stress in response to academic stressors and use less defensive, more effective coping strategies. And mindfulness training has even been shown to have a positive impact on a student's transition to college. And we know that this is one of the most pivotal times in a young adult's life, making that transition, oftentimes being on their own for the first time, having to juggle multiple responsibilities. And so, if we can teach them skills to help ease that transition, we're helping to set them up for success, not just academically, but in all aspects of their college experience. And lastly, the field of self compassion. And this is the one that we find is the least known about. And so I'm really excited to kind of share this one with you today. So, self compassion is the capacity to forgive, encourage, and motivate oneself when struggling with feelings of personal failure or inadequacy. So, really, this is about learning how to be kind to ourselves when we do something that we perceive as maybe messing up. We're so often our own worst critic, and we say things to ourselves that we would never say to a family member, a friend going through a similar experience. So, self compassion is all about learning how to be kinder to ourselves during those moments of struggle. And again, how does this relate to college students and their well being and success? Well, self compassionate students are more likely to respond constructively to academic setbacks, maintain their motivation and sense of competency, and perceive their mistakes as opportunities for potential growth. So, this is really about helping college students recognize that failing is a normal part of the journey. And just because you fail, it doesn't mean that you are a failure. And even brief self compassion interventions conducted with college students are effective for decreasing feelings of depression and increasing feelings of optimism, happiness, and self efficacy. And lastly, research conducted with students indicate that undergraduates who exhibit higher levels of self compassion are less likely to report feelings of homesickness during their first term in college and experience fewer social adjustment issues throughout the duration of their college experience. So, again, another indication of this really helping students properly transition to college. So now that we have covered a little bit about these fields, we've defined them, we've talked a little bit about the research that exists on the benefits that these fields have specifically on college students, I wanted to spend some time introducing you to three experiential exercises. So, one from each of these three fields. And the reason for doing so is because, as is mentioned on the title of this slide, these fields are highly experiential. So, while it's great to have the knowledge, it doesn't really do much if we're not actively practicing and integrating skills from these fields in our daily lives. That is what's going to move the needle from, that baseline into the thriving zone. That is what is really going to help us kind of create a buffer so we're better able to handle times of stress. So I'm going to invite you to participate, and feel free to use the chat. If that doesn't resonate with you, you don't have to at all. I just figured, perhaps your colleagues could benefit from hearing from one another. So our first exercise is going to be talking about character strengths, which is from the field of positive psychology. And unfortunately, because of the time that we have today, we don't have time to go on and actually do this self-assessment, but I highly encourage you to write down the viacharacter.org. This is a free assessment that takes about 15 to 20 minutes, and it will, based on your answers to some questions, it will actually suggest what your top character strengths are. You could do this yourself. You can recommend this to your students, whether it's in the one-on-one work that you do with them, or perhaps as a nice assignment that is not academic. And so for today's purposes, though, I want you to take a look at the list of 24 character strengths that we have up on the screen, and to self-identify what you think your top three strengths are. And feel free, if you want to share them in the chat, by all means, I welcome hearing from you. Thank you, Shar. Thank you so much. Humor, leadership, creativity. Jackie, creativity. Okay, I see some common threads here. Perseverance, self-regulation, humor again, teamwork, kindness, which is awesome. Oftentimes with humor, we're able to maybe sometimes look at negative situations and infuse a little bit of levity to them. Hope, fairness, gratitude. Awesome. Yeah, look at this. There's a lot of common themes and trends, which I'm not surprised. Working with people that are from a similar field. Awesome. Thanks so much, everybody. So now what I'd like to invite you to do is to reflect on, how do you use your strengths on a daily basis? What are the things that you're engaging in that you can maybe think of that play to your strengths? And I also invite you to share those in the chat. I think, again, some colleagues might be able to benefit from hearing how you use your strengths. And the one thing I'm going to say, if you don't use your strengths on a daily basis, or you're having trouble identifying, that's quite all right. That's actually the point of us doing this exercise. So if you're not using them, I want you to begin to think about, how might you begin to incorporate them into your daily routine? And I'll just give some examples. And oh, I love it. I don't even need to necessarily give examples. I'm seeing some come through here in the chat. Perseverance, pursuing multiple degrees, raising a family, working, yes, juggling responsibilities, and sometimes that could really add up. So having the perseverance to keep going, showing I'm vulnerable by being open and honest, love that, yes. Counseling with kindness, absolutely, right? Infusing kindness into our interactions, our daily interactions with people. I love these, thank you. So the whole point of this activity is, and hopefully maybe from some of the responses from your colleagues that you'll see, is it's not to create more work and for you to have to go out and actively do things in your own life in a grave way, in a very significant way. But the reason that I'm encouraging you all to either continue to use your strengths on a daily basis, or at least acknowledge them, or to maybe begin to think of ways that you can use them in your life, is because research shows that so often we are trying to bolster our weaknesses. We're trying to improve our weaknesses, and we don't really focus on our strengths. We don't really give them a lot of, credence or weight in our life, because we say, that's something that we're already good at. But research shows that by focusing in a small way, 5 minutes every day on our strengths, these can serve as protective factors to build resilience during times of struggle. So by focusing on our strengths, we can then really lean into our strengths during moments of struggle that we're facing, right? And these are things, we're humans, we're all going to experience things on, small scale that happen most of the time throughout our day-to-day, and then unfortunately in larger scales, and hopefully that's less frequent. But the whole premise here is that if we can begin to focus on our character strengths, we can use this as a buffer to help us build up our resilience, to help get through times of struggle in a more resilient and robust way. So thanks so much, everybody, for participating. There's some really great things shared in the chat. And with that, we'll now move on to our next exercise. And this is from the field of mindfulness. It is a brief breathing, pause, and reflect exercise. It's an acronym, STOP. And this literally can be done in 2 minutes or less during moments of stress. Really, when you're experiencing moments, this is meant to be used as a grounding, a resetting tool to help us get out of our fight or flight mode, the mode that's usually activated when we're feeling anxious or stressed, and back into our parasympathetic nervous system, which is really our rest and digest, to help us, be able to see things more clearly. So the premise of this exercise is, when you're feeling stressed, I invite you to stop. This is usually not what we do. We often get in our head and our body gets really tense, or we, will kind of react and act on autopilot. And so just stop for a second when you're feeling stressed and take a breath. Our breath is one of the greatest tools that we have available at our disposal, basically 24/7, because, if we're not breathing, we're not living. And so I invite you to really take a deep, calming, cleansing breath. again, this is a great way to ground ourselves in our body and to get us back into our parasympathetic nervous system. Oftentimes when we're stressed, our breathing becomes shallow, it becomes labored. And if we can just take a moment and settle the breath, it could really start to shift our physiological response to whatever stressor we're facing. So once you've taken a breath, I invite you to take a quick scan of your environment. Observe what's going on using your five senses. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? Really trying to, again, get back into the body and out of the mind and the chaos that is often ensuing when we're feeling stressed. And I also ask you to observe how you're feeling in your body. Maybe your heart's beating fast. Maybe your palms are sweating. And by just acknowledging these normal physiological responses that we have to stress, it helps to calm them down and ease the impact that they have on us. So once we've engaged, and again, I know I'm kind of talking about this and perhaps belaboring the point a little bit, but this could be done as like a quick little scan. But once you've taken a moment to engage in the first three steps, hopefully you will be able to be a little more relaxed. And then you could figure out, how do I want to proceed in this moment of stress, or whether it's a difficult conversation that I need to have with somebody, or before I'm giving a presentation. And perhaps maybe you received confirmation by getting clarity and calm in the body, that all you need to do is proceed in the exact manner that maybe you had planned to, and you just needed to recenter and ground. Or perhaps by engaging in this activity, you're able to say, you know what, I could proceed in a better way that's going to serve me better. Maybe I'm going to try to respond rather than react. So it just gives a brief moment of pause for you to really assess what's going on, what's actually true in this moment, and how would I like to proceed. And then the last activity, so this was really just me sharing a quick tool that you could use during stress. And the last activity that we're going to walk through is an activity from self-compassion. And it has to do with identifying our inner critic. So I'm sure this comes as no surprise. Many of you might relate to this, but we have this inner dialogue that's constantly going off in our head. And sometimes when we do something that is, perceived failure or inadequacy, or we make a mistake, that voice is not very nice, and it speaks to us in a pretty harsh way. And we're going to work on trying to identify our inner critic so that we can begin to befriend it and to overcome that voice in a more productive way. So I'm going to invite you to recall a recent time of perceived failure or inadequacy. And I'm going to ask you to choose something that's about a 2 or 3 on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is not emotionally triggering at all, and 10 is very emotionally triggering, right? The point of this exercise is not really to get us worked up. We want to work with something that's more manageable. So I'll just give a moment for you to reflect on something that happened recently where it was something that you felt inadequate, or like you made a mistake, or perhaps it was a perceived failure. And once you've identified this experience, I invite you to start to really replay this experience and to reflect on, how did you talk to yourself? How did that voice inside your head speak to you? What was the tone of voice that was used? What were the words that were said? And just sit with that for a minute, really getting to understand what our inner voice sounds like, because it's different for everybody. And so now I want to invite you to start to think about, how can you personally begin to recognize your inner critic when it surfaces? And one of the ways that we recommend doing this is by giving your inner critic a name. We have some examples on there, a little tongue in cheek with alliteration. You do not need to have alliteration with your inner critic name, but really starting to identify what did that voice sound like, right? Like maybe it was really judgmental and it was a Judge Judy, or it was really nagging and nagging Nelly. But excuse me, by beginning to identify and name our inner critic, it helps to create a little space and for us to understand that we are not that voice going off inside our head. That is something that just lives inside our head. And if we can begin to identify when it comes up, we can begin to help to soften the message that it's trying to share, right? Oftentimes, sometimes there is a message that we need to learn or that would be beneficial to hear from that inner voice, but it could be said in a way that's a little gentler and kinder. So by giving your inner critic a name, it's one of the easiest ways to help identify when it's surfacing and it's not just your normal self and normal inner dialogue going on. And so if you feel comfortable, I always love whenever leading this exercise, hearing what people come up with. People tend to get really creative. If you feel like sharing what perhaps you've decided to name your inner critic, I welcome the opportunity. Charles, what if you don't have an inner critic? I am floored and I would love to have a conversation with you to learn maybe perhaps how you've gotten rid of an inner critic or silenced it, or maybe some of the work that you've done, because I found, at least in my own personal experience, and one of the things that I was going to share with this exercise is the point is not necessarily to get rid of the inner critic, because I have not found a way to do that to date, but it's more so, again, learning how to re-identify and create a little bit more of grace and like a better relationship with that inner critic. But if you don't have an inner critic, that's awesome, and then this exercise is not really applicable. Has been, yes, vanquished, yes, Samuel. But for those of you who do identify with having an inner critic, you're not alone. I think that's more the norm. I welcome you to share, if you feel comfortable, maybe what name resonates with you, to help you name it so you can identify when it surfaces. Judgmental Jill, yep, that's a very common one, right? We tend to talk in a very judgmental way to ourselves. Just seeing if any others come through, and that's okay if not. I named my defensive protective voice, who tends to be this critic, Barb. Great. Yep, it doesn't need to have a descriptive factor. It could just be a different name from our own. So that works very well as well. Again, the whole point is just to really create some space from this inner voice so we could identify when it's surfacing. Karen, great. Yeah, a lot of people haven't named their inner critic. It's not something that we think about, right? It's just something that kind of lives there, that just surfaces and pops up, and it's like whack-a-mole. We try to get it to go back down and it comes up. And so this could be beneficial, again, in really helping to create some space there. Okay, so I hope that you found these exercises beneficial. Again, they're meant to be really brief, really quick, things that you could engage with. And the more you practice, the better you become at identifying the inner critic, at learning to stop and pause during moments of stress, and at using our character strengths to be protective against times of struggle. And so I encourage you to use these exercises, to hopefully share them in the work that you do with students. And before we open it up for any questions, I just wanted to take a moment and share some feedback that we've received from a college student that has gone through training and learning skills from the fields of positive psychology, mindfulness, and self-compassion, and the impact that this has had. And so, as you can see here, it's incredibly positive that this individual learned tools to help them stay more present, to be able to balance their relationships, and really recognizing that they can have a balance of stress and criticism, so they're not degrading their mental health. And I think that's really the goal, right? The goal isn't to say, let's get rid of stress, because that's unrealistic, right? Stress is inevitable. It's something that we're all going to face. And so if we can learn to handle the challenges that we're going to encounter more gracefully and having tools to cope with that better, it will hopefully in turn not have as negative of an impact on our lives. We'll be able to be more resilient, and it won't impact our mental health as much. And so with that, one thing I want to mention, we will be circulating this presentation for any of you that want to dive deeper in some of the research that I shared specifically on the benefits that these fields have on college students. We have a whole reference page here. You could go look at some of those studies. They're pretty interesting. And with that, I thank you so much for your time. And we'll open it up for the last 5 minutes. If anybody has any questions or comments, I'd love to hear from you. And if you need to head out and take 5 minutes to transition before meetings, like that's great too. Wishing you all a wonderful holiday season, a happy new year, and I will be here to answer any questions that come through.